At my husband's wake, my own brother laid his heavy, imperious hand on my shoulder and, without even lowering his voice, said, "Sister, you'll have to move out. The house passes to me as collateral. Here's the contract. Good luck on the street." In the room where moments earlier people had been whispering softly about kind, patient Misha, a ringing silence fell. I took the folded sheet from the table, let my eyes skim the date, and unexpectedly, I smiled. He didn't understand the most important thing. 24 hours before he got that paper signed, Misha and I had done something that would turn his entire deal on its head. The house was thick with a heavy scent, the spent wax of candles, the cabbage pies my husband loved, the black tea poured into small glasses in metal holders. Guests spoke in muted tones, as if afraid to shatter the fragile shell of grief that had settled over our home. I moved among them mechanically, refilling vodka, straightening napkins, taking away an empty plate, placing a clean one. My hands did what they knew, while my soul remained elsewhere, beside his bed in the hospital ward where, on the last day of July, my Misha faded, my one and only my own. We had lived in this house for 40 years. A lifetime. I remember how, still so young, we laid the foundation. He, strong, laughing, his shoulders tanned. I, a student of architecture with rolled sketches in my arms, arguing where the veranda should go. "Lizanka, this will be our fortress," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow with his hand. He built the walls from dark beams redolent of resin, and I filled them with warmth, the smell of apple pie, the laughter of nieces and nephews, off-season cleanings, coziness. I put everything into it, my small inheritance from my parents, my strength, my youth, my dreams. Family values, we said, and it was true. This house was our point of support. Grief is a strange creature. It doesn't tear the world apart, doesn't throw fits. It settles inside like a heavy stone and strips away sound, color, taste. I looked at our neighbor, Maria Petrovna, as she remembered how, after a storm, Misha had quietly, simply, repaired her roof, at his old friend, Uncle Kolya, recalling how they used to fish as boys on the lake. Each word was a soft but piercing prick, all that had been, and would never be again. "Marriage is two hands holding your house," Misha loved to say. And now one hand was gone. My brother, Lavrenty, arrived last, together with his wife, Venera. She was, as always, immaculate, black, expensive, lipstick too bright for such a day, a chill gleam in her eyes. Her gaze skimmed the table, calculating, counting. "Couldn't they have done it more simply?" she whispered to him in the hallway. "Those pies. They could have ordered from a deli, it would have been cheaper. Why such expenses?" For a second my vision went dark. Expenses, on the day we were letting go of the man who for decades dragged my brother out of debt, paid for his failed projects, patched his business mistakes, covered his cash gaps, while I gave in, selling my mother's earrings, reworking our budget, deferring my own plans. But that old residue of feeling, he's the younger one, life's harder for him, still clung tight inside me. Without a shadow of embarrassment, Lavrenty sat down in Misha's chair by the window. No one had dared to sit there since morning, as if the seat still held the warmth of the one who'd gone. He sat like an owner. His eyes gauged the room, not mournful, no, appraising, proprietary. The walls. The furniture. The plot beyond the window. When the last dish had been cleared and voices subsided into a palpable silence, my brother stood, came up behind me, and laid his hand on my shoulder. His fingers commanded. There was no sympathy in them. "Sister, you'll have to move out." The words dropped into the hush like a stone into water. Dull, heavy. "What?" I breathed, without turning my head. "The house passes to me as collateral. Mikhail owed me a large sum. Here's the contract." The sheet of paper slapped onto the tablecloth beside my plate. The rustle across the fabric sounded like a shot. A soft gasp cut the silence. Maria Petrovna covered her mouth with her hand. Uncle Kolya rose, his face blooming red blotches. Venera sat with a small, satisfied smile. She knew. They had planned it all. They thought they had picked the perfect moment. I was weakened, eroded by grief. I wouldn't resist. But just then, something tiny clicked inside me. Not anger, not insult, ice. As if a drop of liquid nitrogen fell into the molten core of my grief-burned soul. The grief didn't go away. No. It froze into a transparent, cold, perfectly smooth slab. And through that ice, I suddenly saw everything with unbearable clarity, like frames of an old film. 40 years flitted past beside me. How I sold my mother's wedding earrings with tiny rubies, the last memory, the only heirloom, to send Misha for experimental treatment. How we put off our dream of the sea, moved it to a third winter, someone had borrowed from us, temporarily. How I handed over money saved for a new greenhouse, because Venera urgently needed a fur coat to match her status. I called it all love, duty, family support. But in truth, transactions. And I was always the payer. For the first time, I felt the same way, about them, about me. The cold inside gave me footing. I dropped my gaze to the paper. The date. April 11th. Below, a flamboyant signature, utterly unlike Misha's firm letters. And then, through the ice, a small warm shoot, memory, broke through. Just 2 weeks ago. The office of Dementi Arkadyevich Aksakov, our friend, our constant lawyer. The smell of old books in leather bindings and the fine dust that lay like a film on everything, sunlit stripes on the oak desk. By then Misha was very weak. His hands, accustomed to work, lay motionless on the table, the skin thinning, almost transparent. His sweater hung on him like a sack. But his eyes, clear, stubborn, resolute, the same eyes I loved. Dementi read the document slowly and distinctly. Trust fund, right of ownership, sole trustee and beneficiary. Dry words, legal formulas, but behind each stood our 40 years, home, savings, the land where we'd put down roots. He finished. Misha picked up the pen, steadying his trembling right hand with his left, and set down his signature. He was signing like a battle, for me. For your peace of mind, Lizanka, he whispered, covering my hand with his dry, hot. I know my brother. When I'm gone, he'll come not for you, for the house. I don't want you to fight. Let it be so he can't touch you. The date on the document, April 10th. A day before Lavrenty's contract. I returned to the room of the present. The ice in my chest thickened. I raised my eyes to my brother, calm, without a spark. He flinched. For a moment his confidence wavered. You understand, Liza, he said more quietly. Nothing personal. It's business. That alien phrase, spoken in a house where every crack in the beams knows our joys and losses, decided everything for me. I carefully folded his paper in quarters and slipped it into the pocket of my dark dress. Excuse me, I said evenly. I need to make a phone call. I went to the study. The library smelled of old wood and books. I closed the door behind me and dialed on the old rotary telephone. Aksakov speaking, came the calm, low voice. This is Elizaveta Polikarpovna, I answered, looking at Misha's portrait. Mikhail was right. It's happened. A brief, knowing silence hung on the line. I understand, Liza. Tomorrow first thing we'll submit the trust documents to the registry office, he said. Please, I replied. And for the first time in days, I felt not the void of grief underfoot, but solid ground. While I saw off the guests and washed dishes, hot water hissing in the sink, somewhere in another part of the city, glasses clinked. Dementi later pieced together the scene from time-stamped bank statements, confirmations from the car dealership and restaurant, receipts. Now I see it like my own cameo memory, a glass table with vulgar artificial orchids, cognac and snifters. Venera had already changed out of mourning, slipped into a pearl-colored silk robe, crossed one leg over the other, her fingers playing with a laptop. Well then, to success, said Lavrenty. At last, a new house, she breathed. The realtor says there's a queue for this kind of lot. We could even do an auction. She clicked, pay, and on the screen large red letters flashed, payment declined. Insufficient funds. The smile slid off, she reloaded the page, tried again, same result. Lavrik, she called, irritated. He came over, lazy, sure of himself. Daily limit, probably. But a thought flickered in his mind. It's an additional card to his account. And the account? Me. Liza, he laughed nastily, blocked the power of attorney? Petty revenge. They decided to celebrate, anyway, at the Metropole. Oysters, French wine. Dessert, public humiliation. When the bill arrived, the gold card didn't go through. It's your terminal, try again. Payment declined by the bank, whispered the blushing waiter. They scraped the last notes from their wallets. The next day, the awakening was harsher. While they argued with the bank on the phone, a courier brought a heavy envelope to Lavrenty's office, Aksakov and Partners. A restraining court order. Don't approach my house within 100 meters. A statement of claim. Fraud on a large scale, breach of trust, forgery of documents, systematic siphoning of funds. Attachments. Credit agreements with Misha's forged signature, a handwriting expert's conclusion, notices to banks about the start of an investigation. Simultaneously, the bank manager announced the freezing of all accounts, personal and corporate, and the car dealership revoked payment and sent a tow truck for Venera's dream. Their success evaporated in a single day. They came to me in the evening, shaking the door, pounding with their fists, shouting. I opened. They burst in, two animals driven frantic by panic. Which? How could you do this to your own brother? Roared Lavrenty, spitting. Because of you, we've lost everything, shrieked Venera. I listened, silent. Anger burns out. They burned themselves. All I had to do was let them finish. When the silence settled over the room, I pulled a gray folder from the drawer, the very one Dementi had given me. I set it on the table, opened to the first page, and pointed at the forged signature beneath a 10-year-old contract. You wanted to ask how I could do this to you? I asked quietly. I want to ask how you could do this to him. And to us. For almost 10 years. He recognized the signature, and blanched. Venera's mascaraed lashes froze like broken clock hands as she read. Their rhetoric withered at once. Before them lay proof, cold, on paper, irrefutable. You're destroying the family, forced out Lavrenty. The last shield he had hidden behind for 40 years. There is no family left that could be destroyed, I said, looking him in the eyes. You sold it off piece by piece for years. This isn't destruction. This is the bill. They left, slamming the door, a cold draft trailing behind them. After that, everything moved not by emotion, but by paper, legal defense, the lawyer's steps, police, banks, court. Everything that had always seemed alien and frightening became a weapon. We filed statements, notified banks of signs of fraud, contested the collateral. The trust Misha and I had drawn up a day before their deal was registered. Trust agreement, fiduciary control, priority over any later scraps. Our home became legally untouchable. At dawn, Lavrenty rushed to the notary, only to meet an implacable elderly woman who had already received notice from the registry office. His contract had no legal force. He shouted about mistake, about his sister in senility. People looked at him for what he had long been, a man who takes what's not his and calls it family business. Then came the evidence, carefully compiled by auditors, dozens of credit contracts in my husband's name, signed by someone else's hand, transfers from his accounts into my brother's companies, mortgage, microloans, credit cards, an entire network. For 10 years he had drained everything he could, using a long-ago power of attorney, once drawn up, just in case. I remembered May 15th, 7 years ago, the day I sold my mother's velvet pouch with jewelry, and saw the same date on another credit agreement. We bought hope, he paid for dinner. The hardest trial wasn't court or the paperwork, but the conversation with my mother. I brought her the copies, told her everything. She sat in silence for a long time, listening, leafing through, holding my hand. I raised a thief, she finally said, her voice as quiet as rustling leaves. It's not your sin, Mama, I said. She nodded, but her eyes held something new, not blind maternal love, but a long, austere love that calls things by their names. And when, a week later, Lavrenty brought our mother to my gate, holding her before him like a living shield, their little play failed. Loud enough for the neighbors, he asked to settle it within the family, to stop shaming us. My mother drew her hand free of his grip, took a step toward me, and looking her son straight in the face, spoke so the entire street could hear, You have shamed our name. Your father was an honest man. This house belongs to Liza. She has earned it. You have earned nothing. It was worse than any verdict for my brother. Because public censure, the silent judgment of neighbors, cannot be appealed. It turns people toward themselves. Later, the court formalized everything as it should, found him guilty on all counts. He received a suspended sentence, considering his age and alleged remorse. But more importantly came the financial judgment. repay the banks to the last kopeck, cover the debts, make amends. Their mortgaged apartment was seized for sale. The car from the showroom never came back. The tow truck took it away. Business, reputation, all collapsed like a house of cards built for years on others' resources. Venera stopped going to the salon, and Lavrenty vanished from society circles. They became ghosts. Did I feel delight? Not a drop. Only quiet sadness at the fact that a blood relative had decayed from within. The garden Misha and I had planted over 40 years was luxuriant in August. The Gloria Day, roses blossomed profusely, creamy yellow cups edged in pink, breathing a thick, spicy fragrance. I loosened the soil, cut away spent heads, and the air held a blessed stillness, the kind that comes only after a very long storm. At noon the gate creaked. Along the path came Dementi Arkadievich, not in his strict suit, but in a summer shirt, with a small wicker basket. "Won't you chase away an old friend?" he asked. "Come in," I smiled, for the first time in many months, a smile that was warm, genuine. We drank thyme tea from my garden. He placed on the table a still-warm cranberry pie. We talked about the weather, the harvest, a book, small things. Not a word about court, money, the past. It was as if we had silently agreed that that page was turned. "You look well, Liza. I see peace in your eyes," he said, studying me kindly. I nodded. I looked at the house, the dark beams drenched in our 40 years, the garden where every tree knows its stories, the sky. Within these walls Misha still lived, not as pain, but as light. "I lived for others for so many years," I said, more to myself than to him. "For my husband, for my brother, for the family. I built a quiet harbor, a shore. I thought that was the point, giving without counting, money, time, strength, and thought, that's love. But it turns out true love does not demand sacrifices. It gives wings. And for 40 years, I trimmed my own so someone else could sit more comfortably on my shoulders." He covered my hand with his, an ordinary, friendly touch. It was enough. Since then, I often think about family relationships, how easily the word family becomes a screen for toxic relatives. How loans, credit lines, powers of attorney, property rights hide behind it. How, without legal protection, without a lawyer, without a clear nothing personal, just the law, kindness gets shoved aside by meanness and greed. I learned to say aloud the words I once avoided: fraud, forgery of signatures, breach of trust, court, priority of a trust, fiduciary management, registration in the registry office. This is not about war, it's about boundaries. Every fortress home has a lock. And that lock is the law. The lawsuits now are behind me, like a long illness that has receded, leaving weakness but also relief. I no longer wait for a call that will break everything again. My mother, having carried out her small trial of the maternal heart, comes more often. We sit on the veranda, drink her favorite thyme tea, and watch the sky turn peach at sunset. We are silent, and that silence speaks more than any excuses. It forgives us, our weakness, our blindness, the love that became a weapon in someone else's hands. We keep for ourselves a simple luxury, to live calmly, for real. And the house, our house, is a fortress again. Not an isolation ward, a place of strength. I am no longer alone in the bad sense. I am alone in the good sense. It is solitude as freedom. I can close my eyes and see Misha smiling. "Lizanka, this is our world." And now I know, this world is in my hands. Not in a scrap of paper with a forged signature, not in someone else's contracts, not in someone else's strategies. It is in quiet mornings, in the scent of apples, in curtains trembling in the breeze, in Dementi's cranberry pie, in my mother's hand, in my roses, in a simple thank you. It is in the laws that no longer frighten me and protect me as they should. The memorial candle burned down. And on the day the door closed behind the last guest, my new life began. Not loud, not triumphant, steady, respectful of myself. If someone asks today what women's strength, a true life story, property rights, financial security, and family drama are, I'll say, it's a story of how one woman stopped being someone's convenient step and became the mistress of her house, her trust, her fate. And if to some this story seems about money, you didn't hear the main thing. It's a story about love, one that requires nothing yet protects everything. About boundaries, you don't have to prove them by shouting, register them in time. And about a home, that is, once again and forever mine.